Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm Randy Karraker. It's great to have you with us. During the course of the last week, the Cardinals traversed the MLB trade deadline, adding 10 new players to their system. During this show, we're going to talk to Xavier Scruggs of ESPN and MLB Network about the look the Cardinals will have heading down the stretch and into 2024, and also a look at some of the new minor leaguers with our friend Brian Walton of the Cardinal Nation. They're both coming up next on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. And we welcome into the conversation the former Cardinal, now of MLB Network and of ESPN, Xavier Scruggs. It's great to see you, Xavier, and it's great to see the success you're having in baseball media.
Randy, thank you so much for having me, man. I enjoy listening to you just as much. You are one of the people that I learn from, right? Being able to dive into certain topics and to be able to get those thoughts out efficiently. I love doing it.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Let's start with this because we had you on the radio before the season started, and we all thought the Cardinals were going to be pretty good. What happened?
Man, that's like the billion-dollar question, right? And I think just watching the games, we've seen it was a mix of a lot of different things. First and foremost, I'll start with starting pitching. I mean, we both know you don't get very far, especially if your starters are not going deep into ball games. And it doesn't have to be every starter, but at least the top tier or the number one, number two. And you could arguably say the Cardinals never really had a number one, number two starter this year. Really disappointing. Obviously, some injuries to, an Adam Wainwright who had pitched well in the past and had been a mainstay in the rotation, but at the same time, underperformances from multiple guys. And then I look at, the Cardinal way is something that we talk about a lot, and it is a real thing because I was a former player in the organization. It's more of the attention to detail. And we didn't see that much at all, especially in the beginning of the season, whether it be base running mistakes, whether it be mental errors, whether it be defensive mistakes that usually they're so focused on and prioritized. That was all off. And then the last thing I'll really say is mostly about the offense, but I think what stuck out to me was the outfield specifically. It was almost like the outfield was one of those areas that you came into question with at the beginning of the season. You expected at least a couple of those guys to perform, whether it be Dylan Carlson, whether it be Tyler O'Neill, who we've seen perform in the past, Jordan Walker, who actually has done well so far this year. But to me, the outfield never performed and never got off to a good start. And the one outfielder in Jordan Walker that did ultimately had to pay the price for many guys not performing, and he himself got sent down.
And Xavier, it's interesting to look around in different fashions. The Reds lost 100 games last year, and they've turned it around. The Rangers lost a bunch of games. They spent money. The Diamondbacks just allowed their team to kind of marinate, and finally they've reached a point where they're a playoff contender. It seems to me like baseball, you don't need to tank for 5 years now. You can turn things around relatively quickly, especially if you have the corner guys like the Cardinals do.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's teams that are able to turn it around quickly because they have some cornerstone pieces. And I think that can be said for the Cardinals when you look at Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt specifically. But also I look at guys who have performed in the past. It's not like this team is a super young team and guys just haven't proven themselves. We've seen performances come out of Tyler O'Neill. We've seen performances come out of Tommy Edman, Brendan Donovan. These guys have all performed at a high level in the major leagues. You could expect there to be some changes for themselves personally to make the adjustments for next year as well. So, and then I think there's also, something that I missed on touching about earlier that you mentioned, asking me about what happened. I really think the Yachty situation was a big deal to this team when they didn't have the leadership in a Yachty or Molina, and even a guy they had last year in Pujols come back. Adam Wainwright was in that locker room with them. There was a different atmosphere there in that clubhouse, most of those guys will tell you. And then you bring in a different cornerstone in a Contreras at the catcher position, who we've seen perform offensively before, and he really struggled in the beginning of this season. So so many things had snowballed, but at the same time, they had the pieces to really allow themselves to propel into next year and be great.
I want to go back to your discussion about fundamentals, too, because that was striking to me. I think it was striking to most Cardinal fans to see what happened. Is that something that is an easy fix for a baseball team? When you struggle like the Cardinals did, and they have been better defensively of late, we got to give them credit for that. But is it an easy fix?
I don't think it is. And I think we saw that early on in this season. It's more about focus, and it's more about intention, and more about leadership along those assets, as well as expecting yourself to be better and to put in the time and the work. And a lot of things, to me, a lot of times, and this is after talking to Ollie Marmol too, is just you think about other things that came along with the Cardinal struggles this year, and them starting to see some of these other teams like the Pirates play really good at the beginning of this season. And then you're starting to think about catching up instead of staying focused on the day-to-day prioritizing, whether it be ground balls, whether it be mentally focused on base running. I think those things took a back burner to really them trying to catch up and trying to make up for what they had not done. And I think that's something that's going to have to continue to be addressed. I think that's going to go into the offseason. Individually, guys are going to have to make those adjustments over the offseason and going into next year. And to answer your question, it's not something that can just be turned to switch. Otherwise, we would have saw the Cardinals do it earlier in the season.
And if you can play that way, and Tony was always a big advocate of this, if you can play good, clean baseball, the way the game is played now, if you do that, inevitably, the other team's going to find a way to beat themselves. You don't even have to win games. Just let the other team lose it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then that's so right. And you think about, obviously, Hall of Fame manager, you think about this Cardinals team not having the strikeout stuff. That makes it that much more important to prioritize. If you don't have strikeout pitchers, that defense has to be on point, or otherwise it gets exposed quickly and you find yourself always playing catch up in the games.
Xavier Scruggs of MLB Network and ESPN with us on the 101 on Sports. More coming up, including what the Cardinals can do to win next year. That's coming your way on the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports. Glad to have you here on Fox 2 with Xavier Scruggs, former Cardinals player, farmhand, and he knows the Cardinals inside and out. He's now with MLB Network Radio, and, of course, with ESPN, and he joins us here on the 101 on Sports. All right, I said before the break, what do the Cardinals need to do? And we've talked about fundamentals, but the Cardinals acquired seven pitchers, but four that are pretty close to the majors. A guy named Drew Rom, who came in the trade for Jack Flaherty, Tekoa Roby, who came in the Jordan Montgomery trade, Sem Robertsay, who also came in the Montgomery trade, and then Adam Kloffenstein, who came for Jordan Hicks. Seems like they're close. So I want to know what needs to happen for the Cardinals to be competitive again in 2024.
Yeah, these guys are going to have to impact the team at some point. And I think a lot of the rest of this season is going to be a lot about evaluation, right? What do those guys end up looking like, whether they're in AAA, whether they're in AA, and which ones will be closest to be able to impact. And then ultimately, you got to look at what they're going to have to do in the offseason. Mo's going to have to do some things to help bolster the rotation, because you cannot necessarily count on all those guys that you mentioned, or even the guys that they've gotten in trade pieces, them all to be ready. So I got to look at, okay, what do we need to bolster and help out a Miles Michaelis? What do we need to do to help out a Liberatore to become and take that next step? The same thing goes for, Steven Matz. I think those things are important about evaluating this rotation first and foremost. And then the same thing goes for specifically the outfielders. To me, what do you ultimately get from health from Tyler O'Neill? Is he able to stay healthy a full season and be a consistent guy that we've seen in the past? Will Dylan Carlson take a step forward? I think so much of it is about evaluation, and then also being able to say, what do we need free agent wise? Because if you look to win in 2024, you have to build on that rotation, and some of those pieces are not there yet. So I look at them in free agency and see who they go get.
He's going to be expensive, but how would Aaron Nola fit in this rotation?
Oh, man, he would fit perfectly. I mean, he's the one guy, and even from a personality standpoint, not super emotional guy. The main thing to me, as we touched on it too, is you need a strikeout piece at the top of the rotation. And without having that, you can't see yourself not only winning consistently over the course of a season, but once you get to the postseason, you don't have a 1-2 solid 1-2 punch. We know pitching wins postseason games. And I think that's what the Cardinals' focus is let's find somebody that can help us win postseason games. Nola's the perfect fit. And I like Nola too because he works off a weak contact as well. He doesn't feel like he has to strike everybody out, and has an arsenal into which when he does get the 2 strikes, he knows how to put guys away and goes deep into ball games, which the Cardinals have not had that much this year.
Yep. And Xavier, I want to hit on one more thing here because we've talked all year long about the starting pitching, right? But the bullpen has really had a struggle. And I think they got boxed in with all the veteran guys. Seems to me like in this day and age in baseball, you need to have like 4 or 5 guys on the shuttle so that when you wear your bullpen down, you can bring a couple of guys up and send a couple of guys back that have options left. Cardinals didn't have a ton of guys with options at the beginning of the season. Maybe that's one of those places where those young guys that we talked about earlier will fit in.
Yeah, that's a great point. We normally see these teams that are able to keep these guys fresh. And I think that's one of the things that you talk about is, it's not necessarily early in the season, but it can be toward the middle and latter part of the season when you start being able to get a little bit more out of guys, or guys are down a little bit. Okay, let me get the next guy in. And the Cardinals have done a good job of that in the past. So I'm hoping that finds a way to continue. Obviously, finding back end of the bullpen is going to be so important, whether it be somebody that it can come up or whether it be somebody you even look at free agency, because guys are going to need help, right? And we saw Hicks has now been traded, so that's not going to be a piece that's extended for a long amount of time. They're going to need some of that. And I think it's important to remember that when you talk about postseason baseball, you're thinking a lot about 7, 8, 9 innings, or the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. And usually the best teams have a bona fide 7th, 8th, 9th inning guy that know how to get the job done.
So we talked before we started recording this about how on TV you can't be a Cardinal fan, and it's fun to be able to be a Cardinal fan. What was the coolest thing for Xavier Scruggs about growing up in the Cardinal organization?
Oh, man, the coolest thing was, honestly, it was just watching and going and being able to talk to Pujols and as a young minor leaguer, because those are the times, even Yadier Molina too, Waino, those are the times that I'll remember most, is coming up and being 20 in the organization, not even 21 yet, and getting to tap on Pujols, being scared as could be. Hey, Pujols, can you show me how to work the bag? Like defensively, we're doing drills in the backfields, and I'm doing over there with Pujols, and I'm like, hey, how do you work the bag so well? How do you get your glove in position? And then him talking to me like a normal person, right? When you get confidence off of superstar players talking to you like a normal person. And I think the same goes for Yadi. When I first got to St. Louis and got to the big leagues, my locker was right next to Yadi, and just being able to pick his brain a little bit, because it's true. He's another manager in the clubhouse. And when you get to learn from guys like that, it goes beyond actually playing on the field. It goes more into life. And you hear those guys talk a lot more, especially Pujols, about life than he actually talks about baseball. And that's what I really enjoy.
That's awesome. Hey, I really enjoy seeing you and hearing you talking baseball, whether it's MLB Network, ESPN, MLB Network Radio. I'm so happy for you, and I know that you love the game and you love talking about it every day.
No, I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. Thank you for having me.
That's Xavier Scruggs, former Cardinal, and you can see and hear him wherever you take your baseball in. Coming up, we're going to talk some Cardinal minor leagues with Brian Walton of thecardinalnation.com. He's next on The 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports, an opportunity to visit with our friend Brian Walton from thecardinalnation.com, the preeminent site for Cardinal minor league information. Brian, it's always good to have you with us on the show. Thanks for your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Randy. A lot to talk about.
Yeah, a lot to talk about. And in addition to the draft, the Cardinals adding 9 minor league players through the course of the trade deadline. And I wanted to get, because I wanted to get the guys that intrigue you most among the 9 that the Cardinals brought in.
Well, the 21-year-old pitcher that the Cardinals got from Texas Tekoa or TK Roby, third rounder in 2020, got above slot money to forgo going to college. 94 to 97 fastball, curveball, slider, changeup, very interesting repertoire. The big concern about Roby has been his health. He had elbow problems in 2021. He's out right now with a shoulder injury. The Cardinals have put him at Double-A, but you have to assume and a 4-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio, so good control, can get the strikeouts when he needs them, because the Cardinals are looking for more strikeout arms. Mm-hmm. So the real question with Roby will be his health, and some folks are very, very optimistic because of that ceiling. Others are worried because of the injuries. But that's the kind of guy that you want to get in these trades to take a chance on, because the upside is really there.
And there's a couple of other guys. I know that Sam Robersa is the way that he pronounces his name. He's an intriguing guy too.
Yeah, and it's not just his background. This is a young man, again, 21 years old, same as Roby, who came from the Netherlands and is more of a self-taught guy. And depending on who you talk to, he has somewhere between 4 and 6 different pitches, low 90s, kind of a finesse ground ball guy. But the Blue Jays thought enough of Robersa to send him to the Futures game this year. Which alongside Tink Kentz from the Cardinals. So this is a guy that they thought has a good future ahead of him. He's going to be going right into the Memphis rotation. So we'll see. He's pitched at Double-A to this point, so he's going to be challenged now in a new league. And this is the type of guy the Cardinals want to bring in. They've got now 2 more months in the season to see what these young guys have and see where they're going to be able to contribute down the road.
And the Cardinals got 7 pitchers. They got a catcher and then 2 infielders. And I know one of the infielders is of particular interest to you.
Yeah. Thomas Saggese was a 5th rounder in 2020. And he was a guy that John Mozeliak initially drew a comp with Brendan Donovan. And I think he did that because Saggese is basically a 300 hitter in his minor league career, good bat control, versatile guy defensively, can play all over the infield. The difference is he's a little smaller in size. He's not 6'1", 195 like Donovan, more about Tommy Edman's size. But Saggese has shown he can hit the ball. He's at Double-A, and he's already off to a very nice start there. And so he's a guy that, as we know, the Cardinals kind of have a logjam of players right now in the middle infield. They're starting to clear that up when Paul DeJong was traded. But, there's going to be some more moves this winter to create more opportunities. So the Cardinals wanted to have a little more depth in that middle infield to contribute potentially in 2024 and down the road.
Brian, ordinarily for guys that are going to be free agents like Montgomery or Hicks or DeJong, teams don't trade high-ceiling minor league players. But of the Cardinals, the players did get. Have we named the guy that has the highest ceiling, or is there somebody that you're looking at that you say, okay, if he fills out and turns into what he potentially could be, he could be a real high-ceiling guy? Is there a guy on that list?
Well, there's one guy who's kind of a wild card, and that's the other infielder. His name's Cesar Prieto. And he came over from Baltimore as part of the Flaherty trade. 24 years old, but he's from Cuba. And, of course, the Cuban players, a little less about them. And sometimes, as we saw with Rosarena and Garcia, they tend to emerge maybe a little later. But a left-handed batter, a very good bat-on-ball guy, not a big power guy. But, as we've seen sometimes, these Cuban players develop well. And so he's another guy who's in the infield mix. Prieto has actually been assigned to Memphis, so he'll be a step closer to the major leagues. It's going to be fun here in the last couple of months to see these young players and see how they integrate into the Cardinals organization.
And of course, these guys enter Cardinal system where they've graduated a lot of young players already to the major league level. And that 2020 draft, I mentioned on the radio show this week, Brian, that the 2020 draft really could be a watershed draft for the Cardinals. We already know about Walker and we already know about Alec Burleson, but I want to get the other 2 guys that we talk about a lot. Mason Winn, how close is he and should he be called up? And then Tink Kentz, who has had a terrific year in the minors.
Yeah, Mason Winn has really, really come on well offensively. We knew defensively he was strong. Frankly, we saw him this spring and knew his defense at shortstop was probably major league ready at that point. But Winn's also worked on playing second base so he can be more versatile when he does come up in case there's not a starting job immediately for him. And he's come on offensively very, very strong. In the month of July, he's our player of the month in the system. Led the system in doubles, triples, tied for doubles, triples, home runs, 8 home runs for Mason Winn. Drove in 23 runs in 21 games, despite being a leadoff guy. Continues to steal bases, an OPS of about 1,200. So Mason Winn just had a tremendous July, and the timing's good. Now, the real question, of course, is do the Cardinals want to try to save his rookie eligibility for next year, which would maybe mean he wouldn't come up until a little later in the year, or do they want to give him, a good solid audition now? I think the difference between Winn and Walker, as folks may remember, Walker had 0 AAA experience before he was brought into Major League camp, and there's a lot of pressure in that environment. And I think Mason Winn, getting his feet wet somehow, some way in some meaningful games this year in 2023 will help him in 2024 and beyond.
And then what about Tink Kentz?
Tink Kentz, the other guy from that 2020 draft, the third high schooler taken, a tremendously talented young man, very, very strong arm, but slight of build. Tink Kentz is not a big guy. And the Cardinals, even though he doesn't really have an injury history, the Cardinals have been very, very careful with Tink Kentz's workload over time. They've now, as he moved up to Double-A, by the way, when he moved to Double-A, he's been extremely successful, continued. His ERA last month at Double-A 2.25 in his first month there. And Texas League is a tough place for pitchers. But they've increased his workload now to 5 innings and about 80 pitches a game. And you want to see that. You want to see how a young man handles the lineup the second time through, maybe even the third time through. Because for Tink Kentz to be a starter in the major leagues one day, you've got to be able to count on him to go more than 5 innings. So the Cardinals are still working on that progression. But let's not lose sight of the fact Tink Kentz is still only 20 years old.
Right, yeah, it turns 21 in just a couple of weeks. Brian, one more thing about the Cardinal system. I've been saying that it's likely next year that they'll have a rookie or a young pitcher as their 5th slot in the rotation, whether it's Liberatore or McGreevy or Graceffo or Connor Thomas or somebody else. Is there a guy right now that you see that could start the season next year at the back end of the Cardinal rotation that could give them innings and reasonable production?
Well, one of the challenges we've seen this year, Randy, is that some of the young guys have had their own series of difficulties. Looks like Matthew Liberatore is certainly first in line, and he's going to get a good shot the rest of this year to prove whether he deserves to be in the rotation or not. Of course, Jake Woodford is a guy who was around for a long time. He's been hurt, hasn't really had his chance to shine. Graceffo got off to a slow start this year, missed 6 weeks with some shoulder soreness, but he's been pretty good since he's come back. He has a 3.6 ERA in his 30 innings since he's been back. So Graceffo has a chance, who was a pitcher of the year in the minor league system last year, to do well. McGreevy had a rough June, but again, his first year in AAA, again, about a 3.6 ERA in July. His strikeouts are down a little bit, which is concerning. But again, these are young guys with their first experience at the level. Connor Thomas, a lefty who was a pitcher of the year in the Arizona Fall League last year, great hopes for him. Off to a slow start again in April and May. Again, got hurt. And so just came back this last week and is building up his innings. And I think Connor Thomas is a guy, maybe if he continues on this progression, we might be able to see him help if the bullpen, if not the rotation in the last month or two of the year.
Brian, you have amazing Cardinal minor league content at thecardinalnation.com. And I know folks can still get that big Cardinal prospect guide.
That's right. We have a 292-page prospect guide where we go through about 6 of the Cardinals prospects in great detail, scouting reports, stats, history, where do they fit in now and in the future. That's a great guide for those who want to follow the prospects. And then, of course, we have regular features on our website every day. The pitchers and players of the month, you can read about a number of players who've continued to excel, daily game recaps, and then we have reporters in all the minor league affiliates. So a lot to see at the Cardinal Nation if you like the Cardinals minor league system.
Brian, thank you very much. Keep up the great work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy.
That was Brian Walton of the Cardinal Nation, and we thank Xavier Scruggs as well, and we thank you for joining us here on Fox 2. For everyone involved with the program, we'll see you next week here on the 101 on Sports.